I had the idea to do, as kind of a lark, this cartoon that sort of didn't exist, but it put these Black children into the space of a Bugs Bunny or a Batman in that conversation. And so to do it as a lark, like I found this stuff and then I kind of appropriated it and so forth. And the response was really good. And it was to the point where like, maybe there's something here. And it also just felt fun.
Hey all, thanks for checking out Chicago Humanities Tapes. We are the audio extension of the live Chicago Humanities Spring and Fall Festivals. I'm your host, Elisa Rosenthal, and I'm here to help you find the answers to humanity's biggest questions by bringing you the best of the live festivals. Speaking of live festivals, our Spring 2025 festival is currently underway. Hey, events are selling out, so if you're in the Chicagoland area, you can still grab tickets to some great programs, such as PBS's David Rubenstein with Walter Isaacson on the journeys of American presidents, a panel on sustainability, community, and the arts in Chicago, curated by the students of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago Arts Administration program, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi on his new book about Malcolm X for young readers, Top Chefs Kristen Kish, and so much more. Head to chicagohumanities.org for all that good information. Today, Bronzeville native and preeminent Black pop artist Hebru Brantley, in conversation with visual artist and MacArthur Fellow Amanda Williams. Brantley's iconic murals are central to the Chicago experience. You've definitely seen the pop art renderings of children, specifically Black children, in fighter pilot helmets and goggles. If you've strolled neighborhoods such as Logan Square, Lincoln Square, Uptown, Westtown, and the Loop, I linked to a map in the show notes where you can look up where the closest mural to you is, and some other fun stuff. This is Hebru Brantley and Amanda Williams, recorded live at the Illinois Institute of Technology at the Chicago Humanities Spring Festival in May 2024.
Hello.
Hola.
So the number one question I got asked when we agreed to do this was, can you get me tickets? The second question was, I didn't know you all knew each other. And I was in shock that people don't know that we know each other. So I thought we would start off by talking a little bit about our history, kind of our trajectories, and why it is that even though the style of our work is so different, that there are a lot of synergies. I think oftentimes when people imagine artists, they don't understand that we are interfacing with each other, even if there's not a kind of outward proof of that through the work, that we really are support networks, and it doesn't mean that we have to be like in the studio making paint together or whatever. Like like there's a kind of ecosystem that exists. And especially in Chicago, you're seeing right now, particularly Black and Latino artists, you're seeing this kind of rise in our celebrity globally, but really we are, kind of this loose network of people that really are cheering for one another, if not working together. And so you have a history in this immediate neighborhood. You grew up not far from here. You went to De La Salle. I taught at IIT in architecture for a long time. But I think really our connection started probably just before your work was going to explode with Flyboy and I was starting to paint the houses. So maybe you can take us back a little bit to that moment and kind of your memory also of Chicago, like, we are children of the Oprah, Michael Jordan, pre-Obama era. Like, Obama is great, but like, we just thought we were supposed to be phenomenal. Like, when you grow up and that's what your television is showing you every day, like, that's the energy and the ethos just in the Chicago air in the 80s.
For some, not all. For some.
So, okay, expand.
Well, I mean,
I'm gonna be Oprah now, expand.
First of all, you're really good at this, so you might want to consider it like a side career.
Okay.
I think that there's outliers, right, within every community. And, for me, I grew up over here. And, the Bronzeville community when I was coming up was very different than how it is now. It wasn't a community anymore, right? It was, a bunch of people disconnected. And, for me, the thing that I really appreciated about the area was the history, but the idea of sort of what it used to be and what it probably could be again. But in that, I didn't really have a lot of connectivity to the arts and to, other creatives, as I was coming up. In high school, for example, to keep people from, talking shit and getting into fights, my shtick was I could draw. I'll draw you a tattoo, right? And, oh yeah, he can draw. Like that became a part of my identity, but it wasn't a thing that was celebrated within, the
larger
community,
culture,
right? And so, it's having to go out and sort of find other outliers within Chicago. And I think even now, like when we talk about, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. Oprah.
No, go for it.
But you and I, knowing one another, and a few other artists from Chicago or live in Chicago that I know, I think it's a result of people with similar missions, right, and similar intention. Obviously, going about it, everybody has a different path towards that, but recognizing that, right, and it's just an energy about it to where it's like, it's a supportive system that we kind of foster and create, because I don't personally find too many people like yourself, right, like a Theaster, or people that are like in the same space that aren't competing, but are celebrating and bringing in, others like themselves.
But by the time I met you, I feel like, to your point, there's a mission, but there also is like a swagger that I don't feel New York has. You can speak on whether LA has that. But there was never a moment that either of us, or at least this is the way you outwardly presented to me, right? There was never a moment where we didn't think we would be here. Like, we didn't think we would be here. We didn't think we'd be all of that stuff that people are reading. But we had such a commitment to the work we were making, and such an excitement and a kind of curiosity about the work. It was like, yeah, so what I'm gonna do is, and then it's gonna explode, right? Like, that was our mindset. And I don't think that we imagined that we rocket this quickly to these kinds of stages. But I do think that was an energy. So do you feel like, because art or drawing, or like what your interests were, and it, you weren't pigeonholed as an athlete, like you had a whole different interest, do you feel like you had to cultivate that kind of confidence, or was it always there? Because that's what I mean about, like, I just had an assumption that you're supposed to be excellent. I have great parents that did that, but also that just felt like the energy. Do you know what I mean? So do you feel like you weren't sure, and then that evolved, and that the work you were making started to help with that, the characters and kind of your inward imagining of these things? Or do you feel like that was always there? So by the 2010s, we were like, and then like we had visions. You know what I mean?
But I think a lot of that came from our own ignorance, right? Like,
this is also true. We didn't know nothing.
If we sat and thought about what it took to get there, as opposed to I'm going to get there, we probably move a lot slower, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I grew up in a situation where I had one parent that fully nurtured my creative, and then one parent that didn't fully get it, right? And not only parents, but family members, et cetera, that kind of tried to pull that out of me, right? Yeah. Like, it's a lofty dream. Yeah, on to the next thing, find stability. But for me, that was the only dream. That was the only thing that like made me happy. That was the only thing that allowed me to function as a human, right? And so it was make or break. There was no other thing.
Yeah,
it was only this. And so, but again, with that ignorance of like, it's just this. I just kind of forged ahead, and obviously, we are where we are.
So maybe talk a little bit about, because I think I experienced this as well. When you are what people are now calling a multi-hyphenate, when you can do a lot of things, it sometimes throws people off, right? They're like, pick something. Yep. You're scattered. You're never going to be good at anything if you don't pick one thing. And I think for you, the breakthrough was when you created Flyboy and Little Mama. For me, it was color theory. But talk about the work that led up to that. Do you feel like there was a moment where you made that conscious decision to hone in on those things? Do you feel like those two characters really were bringing together all the work? The early work of yours that I saw was when it was much more black and white and almost like glyph, and then there would occasionally be like a completed colored component where there'd be one figure that stood out. And I always loved that work because I could see the whole story coming and then sort of a thing. And not that it's not that Flyboy and Little Mama are not great, but those were like whole worlds almost.
Sure.
Right? So in my mind, they're like the almost the backdrop or the kind of, all these movies now have the origin movie after we've seen the whole story, right? Like it's the origin movie. You're gonna do the movies for them, and then we're gonna go back to the origin story. So can you talk a little bit about that trajectory? Was it really that linear, or were you really just figuring things out and then this sort of second idea emerged?
The truth is I've always been all over the place. You know, you talk about multi-hyphenates. I've always had aspirations to do probably way too much. And that is true in the work that I've always done where, like I work on anywhere from 5 to 10 pieces at a time. But that doesn't mean that those 5 or 10 connect narratively, you know, aesthetically. Like they can literally be just thoughts or, you know, moods. And I think what I tend to do is try to, if there's 3 pieces within that 10 that I connect to, I try to connect them, right? But when it came to the early work I did, I think that there was, I think it was a response to the market at the time. And, you know, I went to Clark Atlanta after college. You know, I've talked about this a lot in the past, but like I moved around a lot, right? Because I didn't have any formal arts training or education. And so my arts education became crashing on people's couches in different places in the world, and then like finding that person or those people that do it and just watching over the shoulder, right? This was, you know, kind of predating like the YouTube era. And so I had to find the people that were, you know, actively making to understand what making meant. And, you know, within that time, moving back to Chicago's, you know, art scene was, you know, vastly different, obviously, than what it is now. And there was no place that I fit. And I think that there was like a determination to fit, right? And not only to fit, but just kind of like move some shit out the way. Here I come, you know, I want to do this. And I think that like I took slow steps with the work to kind of, you know, raise my hand like, hey, I'm here. But my approach was always, you know, one, like more the rebel, more I'm going to, you know, ask, you know, I'm going to ask for forgiveness, not for permission type of vibe. But I think that, you know, as I got to know people within the space and as I got to understand what art was, because I still didn't know. I knew what my art was, but I didn't know what you know, fine art was, right? I had a very narrow, very, very narrow view of what it was. But as I got to understand it, I think that I tried to intentionally, you know, course correct the work and guide the ship towards something that became a bit more palatable for my immediate audience. But what I mean immediate audience, I mean the Chicago, right? Black collectives and collectors and so forth. And it's not to say that that wasn't me, because absolutely it was, but I felt like I was catering to, right? And it wasn't, you know, it's a bit of like, it wasn't all I was, right? It wasn't, I didn't feel like it was a full outpour of what I could do and the things. And so, you know, looking at what I loved and what I appreciated growing up as a kid, what were the things that made me happy? And, you know, a few of those things that just held through, you know, I'm a 40-year-old man child, right? Like I'm a big kid.
Very big.
And, you know, the things that made me happy were, you know, graphic novels, comics, anime, you know, cartoons, anything within, you know, popular culture, cult culture, right? These cultish films and animations that I would watch. And so, I just thought about like that. And then I thought about, growing up reading Sunday funnies, like reading Charles Schultz, right? The Peanuts, and how he took these kids and gave them so many layers, right? To the point where they became palatable, not even really for kids. The aesthetic was for kids, but the thought and the idea and the narratives behind it was more for adults, right? It was adult humor. And so, I kind of applied that method within the fine art space and creating characters. But again, it was all by accident. I kind of fell into it. It was a thing that Theaster had done Yamaguchi, was it Yamaguchi, right? The Institute things. And it was kind of around that time, when he was doing that, and I had the idea, because we were talking all the time, and had the idea to do as kind of a lark, like this found animation, this cartoon that sort of didn't exist, right? But it put, these Black children into, the space of Bugs Bunny or Batman, or, in that conversation. And so to do it as a lark, like I found this stuff, right? And then I kind of appropriated it and so forth. And the response was really good. And it was to the point where like, maybe there's something here. And it also just felt fun, right? And I think that was the most important thing. Like whatever you do, you don't want it to. Now, I mean, I don't give a damn if you're a pop singer or you're making millions of dollars. Like at some point, what you do is going to feel like work, right?
Right.
But for the most part, it didn't feel like work. It was fun. Like I ran to it, right? I didn't walk to it all the time. And so, being able to kind of recraft a narrative and not worry about being heavy-handed, because whatever I wanted to say came through the mouths of babes, so to speak. And so that was kind of, where everything was born. And I've told this story a million times of like, wanting to put historical context and have something weighted, with what I do, with what I create. And so that was like, again, in finding like the Tuskegee of it all and, incorporating that into the what if this kid had, there was a relationship to that history and that level of heroism and, and how to tie these themes together. And so, yeah, it was just, again, it was a lot of fun, and it kind of grew into this thing that I didn't anticipate it being.
So we've seen a lot of the work. You're hugely prolific. Can you talk a little bit about like, it is work now for both of us, and we were just talking about, me having to let go of the reins a little bit in terms of support to produce the work. But how often, talk a little bit about when you were starting and now that you have a whole operation, how often are you drawing? Are you sketching? Are you making work? Like, I feel like there's a freedom where you make it and you're on to the next, you're on to the next, you're on to the next. And maybe that also comes with the idea of comics or illustration. And that's a medium where you're able to kind of...
The turnover is fast.
So how, then and now, how often do you feel like, do you still have that sketch pad with you every day? Are you tagging sometimes? What's that?
Well, I mean, honestly, everything is the same. I still create at a very like feverish pace, only because, well, for a few reasons. But I never drew that parallel to, graphic novels and comics and all of that. But it makes a lot of sense. Though I didn't come from that world, again, I appreciated it and was like, still am fully in it. But I think for me, it's more of a matter of like boredom, where, I have these ideas, I get so excited about an idea, and then I know that I have to see it through. Otherwise, I won't see it through, right? Otherwise, it'll just like stay half painted for years. And I don't get me wrong, I still have a ton of that. Right? But yeah, like I think it's just important for me to kind of, put the sort of the heat to it,
right away
when it's there, right? And a lot of the stuff that I do, majority, I'd say probably 80% of the work that I create, people won't see maybe until I die, maybe not then. Like, I'm actually moving studios in LA, I was telling you, and I was trying to take a count of all the works that I have currently in the studio. And most are finished, unfinished, halfway, whatever. But I had 135 paintings that were stretched on canvas. And I'm like, yo, I have a problem.
Your collectors do not think you have a problem. They're like, what? Wait a minute, what? Yeah, but I mean, I think that you, for me, have a freedom of being able to, and it wasn't that I thought they were incomplete, but I loved, again, the works that were more glyph or had these limited colors, because they really are vignettes about like getting to a whole story. For me, that's what it feels like. Like you're just making it, and 20 years out, you'll be able to put together something that you didn't realize was really the build up to this, not just Flyboy and Little Mama, but all of these kind of components.
The world.
Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit about the range of media. So I know that some of that is a strategy in terms of what you were talking about early on about like marketing or marketability. But I too also see it as a kind of a maker's energy, where you're like, there is no medium that I will not transgress. So talk a little bit about the confidence to really transform these characters across everything, and also that kind of reach into popular culture. Some of that was marketing, but do you also feel like that's a moment of, we're MTV children, right? So we saw sound and image all together, right? It was in words. That was normal for us, that words should be on the screen at the same time as these components. So, you got shoes, you probably got wallpaper, I don't know, you got, if you don't, you should. No, if T-shirts. Right. And people are like losing their minds. They're like, yo, the shirt comes out at midnight. Do you know him? Can you call him? I'm not calling him for a T-shirt. But but you really are kind of transcending that range and keeping the excitement across these media. And we often have peers or artists historically that are not just, but like just a sculptor, right? Just a painter. Just printmaking. And so talk a little bit about those decisions that sometimes get made, maybe for strategic reasons, but are there also these kind of creative moments where you're like, I need to see that as a larger than life thing, or a commission might come. Talk a little bit about that process.
Well, I think when it comes to the merchandise component of my business, I've spoken on this before, so if you guys have heard this, apologies, but I'm a collector, right? I grew up a collector. I didn't have any money, but what little money I did, or I could beg, borrow, or steal, like I went and bought basketball cards, comic books, a bunch of other stuff that was worthless now. But, even as a kid, like little kid playing with action figures and things like that, like that's where I sprang from. And so it's always been, the idea has always been cool to me of having things that are accessible, right? Because I think art for a lot of people is so inaccessible, right? Like there's a finite number of people that will go to museums, right? Consistently, without being taken there, without, a school project, whatever. And I'm one of those people that comes from that space, right? I didn't grow up in that space. And even now as a parent, like, I get invited to openings every weekend or every other, and I'm like, I can't go to all this stuff. Like, but the people that are there typically are a certain type of folks. And it's nothing, I appreciate the folks that, that are the patrons for the arts, but there's so many other people that feel like they don't have access to. And so for, a lot of what I do, I want to be able to speak to those people as well and kind of bridge that, right? And if I can be sort of a conduit for someone younger or even older to kind of come into and understand, fine art, that's kind of the goal. And, I looked at, like, again, I'm a pop art kid, heavy pop art kid, right? Like looking at Warhol and, Basquiat now, right? Like everybody, who doesn't know Basquiat now, right? But why is that? It's because rappers are screaming the name. It's because there's countless books everywhere. It's the accessibility of the artist now, right? There's so many people have monetized off of the name. And for me, I want to do that shit while I'm still living, right? I want to make things that allow people to participate in my vision while I'm here, not when I'm gone and I have no say of what's made and what's created, right? So, thank you. All right. Yeah. But yeah, so that was that's always been the goal. It was like, once I get enough money, I'm gonna start making some shirts and da-da. But that was also that was a part of my understanding of the art world, right? When I was in college, that's how I made money. I hand painted shirts, jackets, hats. College students have disposable income, and I'm gonna take it. I'm coming for it. So, and at the time it was fashionable, right? And it's one of ones. And then, stylists. I went to Clark Atlanta, right? It was like around that time where Atlanta started to really, develop their new identity, in Black culture, right? Mm-hmm. Within music at first. And so there was plenty of stylists who were like, hey, Atlanta's also this big, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do a thing, you're gonna stand out. And people coming, I need a shirt for Usher. He has a video shoot, or he has this, or I need a shirt for drama, or whoever, right? And sure, I'll oblige. But again, it was a way for me to practice the craft. Mm-hmm. And I always understood that it was a means to an end. Like, it was a way to elevate my skill set and get out there. But there's a power in teas. Like, you think about, like, how do you get propaganda out there, right? How do you spread people's message? Look, when Obama ran on the Hope campaign, who did he go to? Shepard Fairey, right? And through doing that, he engaged an entire audience that no other president or presidential candidate had ever, right? And it was brilliance. And so for me, I'm not saying that I'm trying to do that, but it just, I look in the audience now, and I've seen a couple of people as I walk in that have on things that I've created. That's the greatest feeling in the world, right? Like, I made that because I thought it was cool, and you thought it was cool too. But again, that was sort of the mindset around that. I hope I answered the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Speaking of brilliance, can you talk a little bit about the original vision for Nevermore, and then the process of pulling that off during the pandemic, because that was brilliant.
Thank you. So when I first started doing Flyboy, Lil Mama, when I first started just really doing the characters, there was never like a prescribed narrative, right? I would just inject them in narratives. And for the past, I want to say 8 years, every time I had a moment, I would write down a thought, right, about where Flyboy comes from, what the world is, yada, 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 and building a Bible. And I'd gotten to the point where everything, I'd spent, a full year, just, that was it. Besides painting, I was just really intent on making sure that this Bible made sense. And it's 400 plus pages. It's kind of ridiculous. I had way too much time on my hands. But, I wanted to do a graphic novel. But then I thought, like, how can I bridge two audiences? And, from sort of the art world to, again, people that are interested and invested in narrative-based, works, how can I bridge that? And so the idea was to do an immersive exhibition around the origin and narrative of Flyboy, right? And to give true narrative to that character, that world, those characters, et cetera. And so that's sort of where it came from. And for those that don't know or didn't experience it, the idea was that you sort of walk into a gallery that was an in-world gallery. So in the world of Flyboy, there is a gallery and you're sort of implanted in it. Upon arriving, you get a newspaper, in-world newspaper. And in the paper, there's articles, there's advertisements, and everything sort of ties back and correlates to what you'll view throughout the exhibition. So you walk through that gallery, and then kind of like Alice through the rabbit hole, right? There's a painting that's sort of blown out, and you enter in through that, and then you sort of are into the world of Nevermore and Flyboy. And, again, I wanted to feel as immersive as possible with the we were limited by, scale and budget, So doing, real commercials, like you entered in through a old school newsstand, right? And as a way of, an old school way of disseminating information. And so the radios in the newsstand had different ads playing on a loop. And, all of these things were created to give a sense that like this was a place that this was a lived in world, a lived in space. And so, it kind of served a few different functions. But the main one was to entertain and engage, right? For all ages, So again, you had the art side, the strictly art side, which was the gallery component. And then everything else was, it was art as well, but it was, stuff that you can actually touch, right? Climb on. And to me, that's a lot more fun than just, white walls and white wine and, And nothing wrong with that, but again, I just, been there, done that. I've experienced that as a creator and wanted to give more to, my audience.
Well, I think the extension, and this goes back to this idea that as artists, we always have these things bubbling in our heads. And for you, it was a natural extension of what these characters already were and what you needed to be doing as an artist. But also in that moment, we see now in hindsight the way in which artists came alive in a different way. So, initially I was like, I'm not doing nothing. This is great. And then that's 5 minutes. And then you're like, I'm secretly doing watercolors in the dark before my children wake up. Like each artist has such interesting stories. And so I think, again, just a nod to the level of ambition and vision all the time of like, no, you're going to time tickets and you're going to, like, how is he going to pull this off? We can't go anywhere, but we going to Nevermore. Like, and then it was another world. It was hope. It was escape. It was something else to get invested in. So I know that it was all those things, but it really did, I think, extend, people's ability to be away from the reality of what was going on and to take that risk to, to be in another space.
Well, it was only intended to run. So we opened, October 2019. It was intended to run for 6 weeks. We ended up going 6 months, and then we ran into COVID. Oh, COVID, and so, but we had a hell of a run. And again, it was just meant to be a blip, but it became something where people would come back, and we had a lot of return visitors, which wasn't the intention, but it was great. And I think that there was a lot of things for a lot of different people, right? A big part of the research for doing it was to do a bit of like revisionist history for Chicago as well. And so, you had an older audience that would come and get a completely different experience based on certain things that we had around the place that they connected to from their past. And then a younger audience that was just like, oh, this is cool. Colors, fun, And so, again, it was a thing for everybody. Bring the whole family down to Nevermore.
Which is better, Chicago or LA? No, don't answer.
I can totally answer that question. Chicago.
But you left us, no. Talk a little bit about...
It's too cold. It's too cold.
Come on.
I didn't know global warming would take effect so fast, though. Like right after I left, like y'all don't even have winters no more. I heard, like,
and LA is mild. Like 65 degrees.
It's like it's actually colder in LA
than it is here.
Right now. So yeah.
But talk a little bit about what it means. That something about the title is representation, whatever. And I was thinking of kind of like 90s represent, right? Like, what does it mean to represent two places? And then also, what is LA? You've gone there for a certain ambition, but what do you think it's infused or even brought out that you resist? Like what is LA doing to the way you think about the work from a creative standpoint? We know from a strategic standpoint or moving into ideas about content, but do you drive around like, what's wrong with these people? And you're drawing it. Does it change the color palette? Like, what does LA really, like, where do you feel like that's kind of funneling into the way you think about things?
I think more than anything, it just allows me happiness. And like in Chicago, I grew up here, and in Chicago, we all know at a certain point from, I'll be generous and even say like January to May, most times, the skies are gray, it's cold. I don't function well, I realized. And I think as I got older, I realized that like, it's not good for my creativity. Like it takes me a long time to get going. And, being out there allows me more opportunities to, if it's February or March and I don't want to work in the studio that day, but I still want to work, I can go someplace else, be outside, and kind of catch a vibe and go. And so I think that's the biggest upside to LA, honestly. And, quality of life for my kids where they can be out and I don't have to throw on 3 layers of clothes and do that whole dance. But, other than that, I mean, I miss Chicago all the time. I mean, it's great to be here. And, but again, there's just that. But I will say this, every time I come back to Chicago, it's like, I'm not even joking you, as soon as I like hit that airport, right? As soon as I come through here, my like spidey senses are going to the point where like, oh shit, that's a dope idea. Oh, that's a dope, like, and I'm just, and a lot of times I'll end up, friends, family want to see me, like, what are you doing tonight? And I'm working, like, because I'm so inspired by being back, right, in Chicago. So, it still functions that way, but yeah.
So we're going to jump to Q&A.
No questions? Great.
No.
See you guys later. All right.
I would just like to know if you could expand more on your characters, just to learn a little bit more of like what inspired, a little bit more about their inspiration, a little bit more specific on Flyboy and Lil Mama.
Well, Flyboy, like I was saying earlier, a lot of the inspiration is borrowed from the Tuskegee Airmen. And just, again, this idea of, heroism. And, within, popular art, a lot of artists appropriate and have appropriated, characters sort of, that are in the zeitgeist. So like, the Mickey Mouses and things of that nature. And for me, that never felt, no knock on them, but that didn't feel like my way in. And that didn't feel, it never resonated in a way where like it caught me. It just felt like a copy of a copy, just, put through the machine a little different. And so I wanted to create my own or have my own characters that I could use, in similar ways. And so Flyboy, if I'm drawing comparison, could be like Mickey, and Lil Mama could be Minnie in that way. But I think Lil Mama's probably the most important in the way that, like, I grew up, my mother had 8 sisters. So I had a lot of aunts, and I grew up around, a lot of women, was raised by women. And then even in my neighborhood over here, that's all I had, there was very few boys my age. And so it was like hanging out with bossy ass, know-it-all, moody, very tough young ladies. And, the idea of Lil Mama kind of came from that, trying to, infuse that power, that prowess that, young Black women have into that character. And then thirdly, I have the character Phoebe. It's the kid with the little frog helmet on. And that kind of came from something different. The idea of a Black kid wearing something as ridiculous as, like a Kermit the Frog head, was more from my own personal experience as a Black man. As I start to travel into different spaces, like I'm 6'8". And so, one of the things that I noticed was, how people noticed me and how different people noticed me. And, I found myself at times trying to make other people, and again, I'm a very nonviolent dude, I'm chill, but I found myself at times trying to make other people feel comfortable when I stepped into a space. And, it didn't sit right with me, right? I should only have to present myself as I am and take it or leave it. And so, I'd had these conversations with friends, and I have a few friends that are, darker skin. And we were out one time, and one of my friends was hurt, and he basically was like, yo, you go in there and ask for help because they're not gonna help me. I'm too dark. And so the idea of like somebody coming that's, sort of peacocking and wearing something that's so disarming, right? Something that's it almost harkens back to Step and Fetch It or, blackface, like the acceptable, way to sort of view us is in this way, and it's palatable. It's, oh, I understand you now. So it's kind of a nod towards that, if that makes any sense. So, those are three of the main characters.
Hello. I really appreciated what you said about like growing up in Bronzeville, really like being able to see the history around you. And then also like a lot of what you were talking about was inspiration from murals. And I really resonated with that because art museums aren't always like the most accessible, but I grew up like walking around and seeing the murals in Bronzeville, and they kind of remind me of your work because so many of them are inspired by history or things that have happened in the neighborhood. And that honestly inspired me to begin showing off the murals in Bronzeville through my own tour company. But I wanted to know, what murals or art did you see in Bronzeville as a child, or just like while you were here, that might have inspired you?
That's a good question. Well, some unfortunately aren't here anymore. I've lived over here since I was 8 years old. And so I think from about maybe 35th to 45th, maybe, there were, some of the residue, right, of, a time past. And, they echoed from everything from your typical MLK, Martin Luther King, to, deeper historical Afro-Cobra, works. And then obviously as you go further, in South Shore, there's a lot more. And so that was sort of my path between, home, school, and my grandmother's house, is what kind of informed a bit of my taste, right? And with those murals, again, they had such like vibrant color, and the palettes just always felt different, right? They were never really muted, and that's what caught my eye. So I don't know if there's like a specific one, but it was, again, and forgive me because I don't know what is still existing and what's kind of, been lost to time, but, it was sort of between that space.
Hello. Hi, Amanda. Hi, Hebru. I have 2 questions. So one is kind of couched in a comment, which is a big thank you to you and your studio practice. 2 of my sons, Kari and Kahari, were interns with you at the time, and it was such a valuable experience for them. I'm curious if you are still engaging with young artists in your studio in LA. And then my second question is, every time I pass your old studio, I think next time I see Hebru, I'm going to ask him if we can activate that with some mural work on the exterior of your building.
It's me and you, Dorian. Let's do it.
Well, the second question, we were just talking about that. So yes, we could definitely talk afterwards. But yeah, I try to as often as possible. I think it was easier in Chicago because there weren't many other artists like myself doing it. And, I also started in Chicago before I even had a practice. I was teaching at Little Black Pearl. And so, it was a lot of spillover from that time. And, I knew a lot of the younger kids, and, obviously your two wonderful sons, and some illustrations I still have to this day. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I try to. I think it's more about sort of, setting up times to speak at schools with different organizations. And then, I'll usually get 4 or 5 kids after that. And what I'll do is, I'll either have them by the studio, or I'll try to help advise them on, getting that bump in their career, getting started, and giving them a little direction.
I have a question about the art scene when you were coming up and the art scene now, and hoping that you could describe sort of what it was before when you were coming up and how you would describe it today, the Chicago art scene specifically.
That's a good question too. You guys are good. You're really good. Okay. I think, and again, this is my perception, so don't hold me over the coals for this, but I felt, and I've said this a lot, like, Chicago is sort of the middle child, right? And culture has always sort of been, sort of brought inward, right, from LA to, New York into Chicago, and for a lot of things, whether it's, music, art, so forth. And I felt like when I got here, we were kind of in a space where we weren't, we were trying to act like the cool kids, like the big brothers, but we weren't there yet. And, again, there were people in the space that were actively pushing and, bringing it here. But then there was just a lot of it was decorative BS. It was like, I need this matches, this ties the whole living room together. Let's, this piece works wonderful. So it was a lot of that, is what I found. That's me personally. But at that time, there was only Theaster was starting up. Carrie was here already. Carrie was Carrie. And, Rashid was in New York. And so he would grace us every blue moon. But, primarily it was Chicago still trying to find its own identity within the space.
And what do you think now?
I think we do a pretty kick-ass job. But I also think that, and as I say this, I'm one of the artists that left. But I think that Chicago has, begun to really cultivate its artists and its art scenes and, their practices in a way that didn't happen before, right? And so I think that obviously that's, a big factor as to why it feels, so robust now and so different.
Mm-hmm. While I don't know if this is a great question or a selfish question, I'm a collector as well, sneakers, what have you, music. And I have 3 of your T-shirts, and I want to know I tried to buy one of your prints at a time. I get ran over online by this stuff. I'm not fast enough, clearly, so I need a way to be able to do that, whether we trade numbers, bump into each other on the street, whatever. I'm in LA a lot, so, I can come to LA. Whatever you need, Hebru.
Well, I got you. We'll talk after.
Hello. I was wondering if you could speak to the artist who's creating a lot, hoping that something hits, and then something sells and is finally paying the rent, but it's the art that they hate making. Do you have words for us?
Yes. Come with the question.
You want to take that one first?
I feel it. I want to hear your answer. But I feel that. I had a traumatic moment recently, so I want to hear this.
Is the question... Wait,
what do you do when you make the thing that's kind of okay, but everybody's like, whoa, and then they get it, and then they're like, where are the next 12 of that? And you're like, I don't. So is that kind of right? And the rent is being paid. And the rent is being paid with the piece. So you making 12 or are you like, no?
The are making the money.
Yes.
But the is the thing that everybody wants. Is that?
No, the is in you, but nobody's seeing that, or they're not really checking for that.
Oh shit! I don't know. I don't know. I honestly don't. I think it's one part preparation, one part luck, and I think it's one of those things. I know how I was able to kind of break through, but it's different for everyone.
I think we've lucked out the and the ahs the same thing.
Yeah.
But I heard Kara Walker mention that she was tired of the silhouettes. And then people were like, we don't like those puppets. When is the silhouette coming back? And then she was at a point where, yes, it was paying the rent, but she could take that risk. But that is a real struggle.
I can speak to that too, because, again, like a Kara, obviously I'm no Kara, but doing things sort of that feel repetitious, right? For the sake of
paying the rent.
I know it's gonna sell.
Yeah.
Right. It does become very boring, and I think these past 2 years have been really challenging for me because I've been fighting that so hard. Where I told you I get bored, and I want to do things that I feel like are innovative and new, and it's hard because there's a expectation that is weighted on you of the next work needs to look like the last work, or maybe just the elevated version, wash, rinse, repeat. And so I don't know. I think that for me, it's been a thing where I found success in slowly eking out the other stuff, right? The stuff that and people being receptive, right? It's like, as long as I still got a little, it's over here. The ooh, the is, and so, and it's kind of, what I'm leading towards with the new stuff, where there's a hint of the old, but primarily this is, I think artists, it's tough because I feel like artists should be allowed to evolve in a way, right? When and some artists are really good at their evolution because it's very, very calculated. And especially musicians. When you look at how an artist can transform from album to album, it's still that artist, but there's an elevation or there's an, evolution to the work. And we don't typically get to see that be, a success within fine art as much, right? Because there is an expectation of that thing. I don't know. I'm pro just do the shit that you want to do and it'll find an audience.
Excellent.
To learn more about Hebru Brantley and Amanda Williams, head to the show notes or chicagohumanities.org. Chicago Humanities Tapes is produced and hosted by me, Elisa Rosenthal, with help from the hardworking staff over at Chicago Humanities who are producing the live events and making them sound great. If you've been enjoying our programming, the best way to support the podcast is to leave a rating and review. Click subscribe to be notified about new episodes, and send your favorite episode to someone you think would like it. And hey, we want to hear what you think. Fill out the short survey in the show notes to help shape the future of the podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another new episode for you. But in the meantime, stay human.